I'm Brandon from My Seminary Life, and these are the best classes that I took in Bible college and seminary. But before we get started, as always, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel and enable notifications to always on so you never miss another video. And drop in the comments and let me know what were your favorite classes that you took in Bible college and seminary if you did go. Now, like I said last time, this is a two-part video essay talking about the worst and the best. So I've already talked about the worst. You can check that out in the last video. Today is about the best, the good stuff, the classes that I liked. And just to get it started, broadly speaking, I would say some of my favorite classes have always been anything that falls under the homiletics category. Anything preaching, teaching, writing Bible lessons, writing sermons, anything in that category, even getting into hermeneutics with the study process. I have always really liked those kind of classes. And as somebody who's been a traveling preacher for 10 years, I've preached dozens and dozens of times. I'm not even sure how many times I've preached and taught God's word at this point, on top of doing the podcasting. To me, taking a class on preaching, taking a class on writing Bible lessons, reading books on homiletics, this isn't beneath me. I know some people, they see it as very restraining, having to now sit here and be told, this is how you write a sermon outline. And if that's you, you are more than allowed to feel that way. For me, though, when I take a class, read a book on preaching, it's more like when you take your car in for an oil change and they check the fluids, rotate the tires, let you know, hey, there's this thing over here we recommend, by the time you come back to get this looked at, or hey, everything looks really good, we'll see you next time. That's how I feel when I take a preaching or Bible teaching class. It's more like a check-in. I do think, as I've talked about before, I do think preaching is best learned outside of the classroom when you're out there getting your reps in, doing it for yourself. But at least for me, I like being in the classroom and being critiqued a little bit. I like reading and hearing other people's thoughts on preaching and teaching. So that's why anytime this kind of a class comes up, I'm always very positive, very happy for it. And I take it very humbly. If someone doesn't like my preaching style, or if something comes up, then I'm like, oh, I usually do make that mistake. I'll have to watch it next time. Whatever the case may be. So broadly speaking, that's, I've taken several classes like that, but getting a little bit more narrow now, I would say one of my favorite classes that I took in seminary, one of the best classes I took in seminary, and if you've been listening to the show, it may not surprise you that I say discipleship methods. Discipleship methods, I think, was the best class that I took in seminary, with a special shout out to spiritual formation. The course Spiritual Formation was the first class I took going back into seminary for the second time. It took me 2 tries to finish seminary. And I appreciate having taken spiritual formation first, because it felt like a real, going back to more car metaphors, a realignment, a readjustment, getting back into the swing of things. It was a class focused on sanctification, on prayer, on, personal spiritual growth. Like, it was a good class, I think, for getting back into the academic environment and getting back into a academically religious spiritual environment. So with that aside, I would say the best class that I took was discipleship methods. And that is because it fundamentally shifted my entire thinking on discipleship. Like, it changed everything about how I think about discipleship, how I implement discipleship, as we took a biblical and historical look at how discipleship was originally took place at the time of Jesus, and how it was worked out throughout the past 2,000 years, and understanding what it really is and how core and central it should be and truly is to a Christian's growth. And the spread of the gospel. And as someone who also didn't have to take a church history class, it also fulfilled a little bit of a need for some church history, because there was one of the books we read was wonderful as it walked through briefly how this has taken place throughout the past 2,000 years. Another reason why I love this class, and this gets to one of the positive things about seminary that sometimes gets overlooked, is that as I was taking this class, I was able to directly use the knowledge and skills that I was learning into a ministry that I was involved in at the time. Like, there was learning, implementation, and oftentimes there's this idea that people who go to seminary just get a lot of head knowledge, and it is true that seminary can become an environment where you just get a lot of head knowledge, but there are very good classes out there that teach you knowledge that is applicable, that teach you skills that you can immediately use. Discipleship methods may have been a perfect class, is what I'm getting at. But there truly was one other class that is perfect. It was perfect. It's the best class I have ever taken, and I would hope that someday I could recreate an experience like this for students. When I was in college, I took a class on C.S. Lewis, and already many of us are now excited because obviously the class on C.S. Lewis is going to be one of the best classes, right? You would hope, at least. But I took a class on C.S. Lewis, and this was my first real exposure to C.S. Lewis. I had read a handful of the Chronicles of Narnia books. I grew up watching the Disney Chronicles of Narnia movies, but by the end of this class, we dove in deep into the world and the writings of C.S. Lewis. And one of the best parts of this class is that this was not a requirement for my biblical studies major, but actually was an elective I could take for my communications minor. This was a class all about understanding how C.S. Lewis communicated, specifically through written word, but also like in radio programs, like with how eventually what Mere Christianity was published into was radio programs. So yeah, it was actually a class that was more so about analyzing how C.S. Lewis communicated. It wasn't a literary class for English majors or creative writing minors. It wasn't a biblical studies requirement. This was for my communications minor. But really why this class was so good isn't just because it was C.S. Lewis, it wasn't just because I took it for kind of a quirky reason in some ways, but this class took place in the fall time. It wasn't on campus. It took place at the professor's house. It was fall time in Indiana, which I know everybody wants to go to Boston in the fall, but fall time in Indiana is also very pretty. It gets very pretty out here. It was fall time in Indiana. We met at the professor's house, and since we met at the professor's house, it was a very small class. We're talking less than a dozen students. I would say probably like 9 to 12 students were in the class, including myself. The professor's wife baked delicious cookies and pastries, got snacks for us. There was always hot apple cider, hot cocoa, decaf coffee. The professor's fireplace was always going when we met, and we would just sit around in his living room and discuss whatever book it was that we read that week for the class. Now, like I said, I was way into C.S. Lewis literature by the end of this class. We read, I think it was half of the Chronicles of Narnia, Till We Have Faces, Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce. For 1 week on the Inklings, we had to read The Two Towers. Paralandra, we had to read. Selected portions of Mere Christianity, Surprised by Joy, a few other things in there as well. But yeah, we had to read all of that in an 8-week course, so it was basically a book a week is what it came down to, plus a couple additional filler readings as well. And it was the most ideal environment for discussion-based learning, particularly when it came to the author in question. If you're going to run a class on C.S. Lewis, and like I said, I hope I get to do something like this someday, this is the kind of environment that I think you should do this in. Like, it should be a rule that if you're going to host a class about C.S. Lewis literature, you better make sure that all of the aesthetics are on point, because I truly think it added to the environment and to the education. And it also gets back to this idea that sometimes, as we've talked about before, education isn't always best in a classroom environment. Sometimes, also when it comes to discipleship as well, ironically, that the best places for this to take place is gathered with people around a fire with some hot cocoa. I went to a dry campus, so obviously, like, ideally there should have been like brandy or alcohol, lagers, beer or something, but it was a dry campus, so we weren't allowed. We signed a covenant. We weren't allowed to drink. But so, we're gathered around with hot cocoa and discussing C.S. Lewis and just bouncing off of each other. Like, that I think is what this should more so look like. Even outside of, studying the works of C.S. Lewis, like when we talk about scripture, when we talk about theology, when we talk about all these other things, it's not always best suited for the classroom. Sometimes it's best just to hang out in a living room and have some cheese and discuss good books. Yeah. So yeah, that was the best class. For sure the best class I have ever taken, probably will ever take. There's a handful of classes I'm interested in taking here in the future. So we'll see if they ever get onto the show, if it ever trumps my experience of C.S. Lewis. Persuader was the name of the class. But that was the best class ever. Thank you for watching this video. Like I said earlier, please like it, leave a comment below if you have a favorite class from college or seminary that you would like to share with everybody. And again, hit that follow button if you haven't yet already. Regular episodes of the podcast come out every Saturday. We're in December right now, so it's going to be a lot of holiday-themed episodes, and then episodes looking back and episodes looking forward to 2024. It's gonna be lit. Do people still say that? Anyway, I've been Brandon. This has been My Seminary Life. Thank you all for listening, and remember, theology is for everyone, so keep on studying.